Hey, what's up YouTube? This is tcgsam, and in this video I'll be doing a more in-depth breakdown of my top 8 YCS Montreal Genesys format Dracotail Predaplant deck. Even though the deck profile is already up on the channel, in this video I'll be diving deeper into some of the theory behind why I played certain ratios and why I played certain cards, as well as things like going over my matchups and also discussing the Genesys format as a whole. So whether or not you are a player that already plays Genesys or has ever played at all, I think there's something for everyone. So feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps that are on the screen right now, or using the chapters on YouTube to any section that interests you. I'll be starting off by going over my deck profile really quickly once again, and then I'll be explaining some of the choices a little bit more in depth. So let's start off with the main deck. Of course, like I said, I was playing Dracotail Predaplant. So for the Dracotail engine, I think you just need to max out on pretty much all the names that you can. And of course, one copy of 5 mana, 1 Malulu, 1 Frixel, because Malulu and 5 mana are pointed. And like I said in my deck profile, I probably should have played more copies of Frixel, just because I feel like any hand that you are able to fuse away a Dracotail, you're going to be in a really good spot. Whether you're going first and being able to set a trap, or going second and being able to set a fusion spell to continue breaking their board, I think no matter what, you always want to see at least 1 or 2 Dracotail names in hand. So in the future, I'd probably bump Frixel up to more than 1, but before the event, I didn't do that much testing, so that's why I only ended up playing 1. And of course, you can only afford to play 1 copy of 5 mana and 1 copy of Malulu, because they're 30 points for 5 mana and 7 points for Malulu. I definitely would want to play more copies of Malulu if I could, but ultimately, this deck just doesn't have that much wiggle room in terms of the amount of points that you can play, because a lot of the best Dracotail cards are pointed, and those cards being, of course, the traps and the spells. So Kitu is 15 and Rahu is 10. Ultimately, you could end up choosing to cut 1 copy of Rahu and getting 10 points back. But like I said in the profile, I wasn't really sure what I'd put instead with those 10 points. I didn't feel like any single piece of non-engine or any playset of non-engine was necessarily going to be more impactful than just a single copy of Rahu, because I do think having the extra copy of Rahu as your 6th spell is particularly good in this format, because not only are the games a little bit grindier, but also a card like Skullmeister is pretty popular. And so when you go to fuse off your guys, you want to make sure you're insulating like your best effects from hand traps. So for example, Arthalion effect, making sure it's not the last thing in the chain, making sure a card like Pan or Urgula especially are not the last card in the chain. You want to make sure you always have enough targets to legally set off of like the quote-unquote like throwaway names that don't really do anything else when fused, so like all the Spellcaster Dracotails. So overall, I thought that 2 copies of Rahu was pretty good. In the future, I may consider cutting it down to 1 and using those 10 points on something like Shaddoll Fusion, because I think in a lot of the matchups, Shaddoll Fusion would just be an incredibly powerful board breaker. And honestly, if you resolve that card going second against most decks, it's probably just enough to automatically win the game. So I think in the future, maybe I would consider cutting Rahu down to 1, but at least for this event, I was pretty satisfied with playing 2 copies of Rahu. It definitely came up a couple of times. So that's it for the Dracotail engine. I think aside from, like I said, more copies of Frixel and maybe cutting down to 1 Rahu, there wasn't anything else I'd really want to change. You can make the argument for maybe playing an extra copy of a trap like Dracotail Sting if you do choose to cut Rahu, but I didn't really want to hard draw the Dracotail trap cards, and so ultimately I felt like 1 of each was probably the best ratio. Never really felt like I needed more copies of them. Next up for the Predaplant engine, the supplementary engine to raise the ceiling of the deck. Played 3 copies of Longfelia, 1 copy of the Lizard. This is probably the best normal summon in the deck. Like I said in my profile, it gets you access to a fusion spell, meaning it lets you play the game if you have Dracotail cards. It gets you to a Crystal Wing, it gets you to a draw 1 off of this. It also gets you access to another copy of 5 mana basically, because the Synchro Engrave, when your opponent specials a monster, you can banish it and a poly to fusion summon right away into anything too. Not to mention, this also gives you an incredibly good follow-up as well. You can banish it to reset Poly from the grave for an extra push, or you can use it to put a Predator counter on something, which can help with a card like Biblisp, where it can act as an extra extender coming back from the grave. I definitely did that a few times, putting it on like on my own monsters, bringing back Biblisp, and then using the extra polys that I had in my hand to fuse away like an Arthalion plus this into something like Dracosapelia for an extra interaction. Of course, you play Biblisp because you're playing 3 copies of Predator Primitive. Going first, it is a little bit worse in my opinion to see than the normal summon of this itself, because it does lock you right away into dragons and plants, meaning you can only really go through Dracotail Arthalion on turn 1. Most of the time, that's not really an issue, but I think that going second, it can be a little bit dicey in some spots, but on the other hand, going second, this card is a little bit better because it's harder to interact with than Longfelia. And then for the actual fusion spells themselves, I played 3 copies of Poly and 1 copy of Double Fusion. So Double Fusion is basically another copy of Polymerization, except it gives you the option to fuse twice. I felt like having an extra fusion spell was pretty nice because it did give the deck a little bit extra layer of consistency. And throughout the entire tournament, I don't recall a single game where I bricked. I always had at least one line of play. Of course, one line of play was not always enough in some cases, but in every hand I drew, I at least had a way to play the game and get access to a fusion spell. So I felt like having this definitely is good. But I guess the downside of it is that since you are playing such a heavy engine deck, you're making it so you don't have that much room for non-engine, and that's kind of one issue you'll notice with this deck. For more engine, 3 copies of King of the Swamp. Extra consistency, like I said, I felt like every time I resolved the fusion spell, I was winning the game. Not to mention, in this deck, your fusion spells are basically like your board breakers going second. When you fuse off the Dracotail names, they get you access to Key2 and Rahu, which can get you into Urkla and Pan to start breaking their board. You definitely want to make sure you're always seeing fusions plays. Of course, King of the Swamp is the best one too, because it can also copy the name of any fusion material, and that's relevant in the extra deck. And then for the non-engine I played 3 copies of Skullmeister, 3 copies of Chalice. I think Chalice is just the best low point non-engine in this format. Almost everyone I played was playing it. And also in this deck specifically, since it's very good because most decks are only ending on like maybe 1 or 2 ways to negate your fusion spells, and just being able to push one of your fusion spells through, like I said, it should just be enough to crack like most monster boards. And the reason for that is because if you resolve a fusion spell, well, you can chain block all the important effects like Urkla and Pan and Arthalion, and they'll maybe negate the last card in the chain, sure, but you'll generally be able to crack through a lot of boards like that. And throughout the tournament, in Swiss, I went 2 and 9 in die rolls. And so basically almost every match I played, I was fighting an uphill battle going second into my opponent's board. But cards like Chalice just help push the fusion plays through and help you, and it gives you a chance to win when going second. 3 copies of Meister. This is probably the best free hand trap that's in the format. It's obviously not great in certain matchups, and it's pretty low impact in other cases, but I felt like in a deck like Dracotail, since a lot of the times you are drawing cards off like your traps, you want to at least give yourself a chance to draw into something that's like valuable, whether that be like King of the Swamp to fuse into Millennium Restrict, or drawing actual hand traps like Skullmeister to back up your board a little bit. There were definitely times where I was basically playing pure Dracotail throughout the event. I didn't see the Predaplant cards, so my interruptions were basically concentrated like solely in the trap cards and a card like Gulamel. So I think having at least like a couple of draws that are actually good when you draw into them off the traps is something that you need to consider. Last card I played was 1 copy of Gogolith. This was the kind of the 40th card. I felt like I wanted another card that was like good to fuse off with, but in practice, I ended up siding this card out a lot. It wasn't actually that good. I think I only used it once. I think this card is a little bit win more because I feel like if you are playing the game in Genesys format, you're probably already in a very good spot. I'd probably choose to replace this with like maybe an extra copy of Frixel, just to have more Dracotail names to fuse into. Maybe you can also make the argument to cut a card like double fusion as well. Just go down to 3 polys and just play like maybe 2 extra copies of some free non-engine. I think that's also not unreasonable either, but I think this card was like a cool idea in theory, but I don't think I'd play it in the future. So that's it for the main deck. For the extra deck, I'll just very quickly go over what I played again for the Dracotail names. 1 Arthalion because it's 20 points, 1 copy of Chalice, and then 2 copies of Gulamel. I felt like you need at least 4 Dracotail names. I think I did go through 4 a couple of times. In the future, maybe I choose to play like 2 copies of Chalice, 1 copy of Gulamel, because Chalice is not only a dragon, meaning if you're locked under Primitive, you can summon a Chalice if you just need to like use away cards. But also Chalice is one of the best cards I found like when going second breaking boards. Like you just shuffle away like a card that's a floater, you shuffle away a card that you don't really want to pop with Pan. Not to mention it also puts your resources back to give you a better grind game. So I felt like playing 2 copies of this is probably better than 2 copies of Gulamel. 1 Secretarial, 1 Mysterion. These are pretty standard Dracotail cards. I don't really think you need more copies of this. I think some people may want to play 2 copies of Secretarion, but I didn't feel like you needed it in this deck. I probably only went into it a handful of times throughout the tournament. 1 Mixuzia. This is also one of the other good like targets to fuse into with a card like 5 mana. It lets you, for example, like make a card like Mysterion when in response to, let's say, one of your opponents special summons a monster with a monster effect. Lets you make a card like Dragostapelia as well in most cases. So I felt like Mixuzia just gave you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you wanted to do, and it was one of the easiest fusions to make because you can make this with like any of the Dracotail spellcasters and any monster in the deck. 1 Millenniumized Restrict. Like I said earlier, you want to be drawing into cards off your traps that can actually help you interrupt your opponent. And drawing into a King of the Swamp is generally not very good unless you play a card like this, meaning you can fuse into it with a card like 5 mana because it is a spellcaster, or with a card like the Predaplant Synchro in the Grave. Just give me 1 extra piece of interaction on your end board is really good. 1 copy of Starting Venom. I think this card is pretty needed in this deck. This is an incredibly good card at breaking boards. A lot of decks are going to struggle to out this card cleanly without triggering its effect. And so if you are able to get this card on the board, most of the time, you're going to have to burn like a negate on its effect, or they're just going to have their entire board blown up. Last fusion I played was 1 Ambulo Melodies. I didn't make this card a single time in the tournament, and I probably wouldn't play in the future. But I think the theory was like, if for some reason like you had a bunch of Predaplant monsters in hand, fusion spells, but you just didn't have access to like a card like Lizard or something, maybe you can get access to it with this, but ultimately I don't think that was very good. I'd probably choose to play another Dragon or Spellcaster fusion monster that I can make off my mana, just to give you a few more options. For the Synchros, 1 copy of Baltea, 1 Bramble, 1 Black Rose, and 1 Crystal Wing. All these are part of the Predaplant combo where you go this, summon a level 3 back, draw a card, make this summons this, and then this brings back the level 1 tuner from the grave to make Crystal Wing. Crystal Wing is 0 points in this format, so it's nice to have an extra thing on your end board to give your deck a much higher ceiling. Not to mention, having Black Rose access means that your opponent does always have to respect like this bringing back a level 3, and they kind of do have to deal with the bodies right then and there, otherwise they're at risk of losing their entire board. So in terms of the extra deck, other than Amulet Melodies, I don't think I'd really change anything else. I felt like the extra deck was pretty perfect as is. For the side deck, I think this was probably my biggest mistake in deck building. I chose to play 3 Slumber and 3 of each of the Kaijus. So the theory was, of course, like these cards are free, but in practice I found that a lot of decks either have a way to protect their board from card destruction, so for example like White Forest, or when you're just playing against a deck that actually has like negation, just seeing this card is not very good. Every time I saw it I was like, dang, I wish this was just like a Sphere mode or something instead, where I can clear out their entire board and then just play a fusion spell and win from there. So I think in the future I definitely choose to play 3 copies of Sphere Mode. This could be a card like Lava Golem, or in the future I would maybe cut like the Rahu down to 1 to give myself 10 points back and play 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion here instead, because like I said, I think Shaddoll Fusion would have been honestly one of the best board breakers in the deck. Every opponent I was playing against was basically negating like the first fusion spell I played, and so if you have multiple fusion spells and then just play Shaddoll Fusion last, like you just should instantly win the game. I really don't think most decks have a good way to deal with Shaddoll Fusion resolving, so in the future that's probably what I do. I also noticed like all the games I lost going second were when my opponent set up way too wide of a board, where I needed to basically draw the perfect hand with like multiple ways to fuse in order to really push through that board, whereas a card like Sphere Mode could just be a single card to out basically all the relevant cards on the board and just allow me to only draw a single fusion spell and yet still win. I don't think the normal summon restriction of Sphere Mode would ever really come up because you do play so many fusion spells. I also chose to play 3 copies of Cycle Reader. Like I said, I didn't really do much testing for this event. I played basically a few games on DB, and I looked up a few deck lists that were doing well in the format, and I noticed that, and I had heard that it was possible for Teller Knights to do the Mjolnir lock on you and just FTK you, and I felt like, oh, having an out to that would be pretty nice. I also thought it could be good against like certain light decks, like for example the Fairy Tail deck. In practice in the tournament, I maybe used it like once against like a Drytron deck and maybe once against a Fairy Tail deck where it wasn't even good enough to stop them. So I feel like in the future this probably would be changed for more like breakers, and I just adopt like the full breaker approach in this deck, since you aren't able to play a high enough count of hand traps to really do much against your opponent, especially when you're so limited on points. So in the future I think this card might be like Lava Golem or something. I wanted to play at least 3 copies of back row removal, so 2 MST and 1 double and 1 Cosmic Cyclone. Cosmic Cyclone is just because this card is at 1 point and I had 99 points after spending everything on the main and extra deck, so I figured, okay, Cosmic's like marginally better than MST, let's just play 1 copy of it instead. You definitely need at least like 3 copies of Spell and Trap removal, because there are floodgates in this format, like non-fusion area, which can be pretty bad for you. I only got non-fusion area once, but I think that it's definitely possible that people might start siding it, especially if fusion decks like Invoke get more popular too. So, and of course, going first against a lot of decks, these cards are also great. The last card I played was 3 copies of Debunk. I saw that Blitzkrieg was the best deck. A lot of people are playing cards like Eye of Truth, but I felt like that card wasn't very good because you would never really want to side it into any other matchup other than Blitzkrieg. Whereas with this, I sided it in like almost every time I went first. But honestly, I cannot tell you how good this card is because I didn't draw it in a single one of my games. So I think the theory is still solid. I probably still choose to play in the future just because I feel like this card is one of the highest impact like 1-for-1 trades when going first, and plus the fact that it's free. Like, I think that this card has a lot of potential, and I definitely would continue playing it going forward, just because there's so many decks in the format that have grave effects and monster effects, and just giving the Dracotail deck like more ways to actually stop like monster effects is actually pretty good, because this deck naturally doesn't have that many ways to do so. Alright, so that's going to do it for the more in-depth deck profile section. In this next section, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of the matchups that I played. Then I'll be going over my feature match, walking you through my thought process at the time, and giving you, I guess, a taste of what a Genesys match may look like. And then lastly, I'll be going over my general thoughts of the format after having played it for a weekend, the ups, the downs, whether or not you should try it as an advanced player. So let's hop over to that. Alright, so in this part of the video, I'm going to be going over my matchups, and I'll also be highlighting anything interesting that happened during that match. So starting off with the first round of day 1, I played against Radiant Typhoon, where I lost the die roll in this matchup. He set up his full board in game 1 with like Totem Bird on the end, so giving him an extra spell, Trap Negate, to stop like my fusion spells was enough to win him the game. Not to mention also, Dracotail just has a really bad time with Radiant Typhoon, because anytime I resolve a Dracotail effect to set my spell and traps, it's just gonna get blown away by their Mystical Space Typhoon. So I ended up losing game 1 pretty fast. Game 2, I don't think I was particularly warmed up at this point. I didn't play particularly clean. My advantage going first was just too big, so I still was able to close out the game, although I did think I gave him a path back into the game more so than I should have. And in game 3, it was just unlucky for my opponent. He just bricked, so I was able to win that game. This opponent actually ended up getting top 4 in the event, so honestly, kind of crazy way to start the day, playing against someone who ended up also topping the event. Next round, I played against a pure Doomsday deck, and I also lost a die roll in this one. Again, in game 1, like, my opponent kind of just sets up their full board, and I'm not able to really do much. The thing with Doomsday in both Advanced and Genesis is that it still sets up a pretty scary board, and it does have easy access to an Omni Negate with a card like Regulus that's searchable. Especially because game 1, I don't have that many like non-engine cards in my main deck. I wasn't able to break through the board. Game 2, going first, pretty straightforward win from there. I felt like I didn't really have any issues going first most of the time, even if I don't see like non-engine. Just the Draco cards alone are still strong enough to at least keep you alive for the turn, and they just give you so much follow-up on the next turn that doesn't even matter if you aren't able to full stop your opponent. Unfortunately, game 3, the only non-engine I saw was Kaiju Slumber, and it was at this point I kind of realized that it was a mistake, like I mentioned in my deck profile, to play Kaiju Slumber, because, well, my opponent just had, not only did they have like a Drastius on the board that wasn't really affected by Slumber, they also had a Therion King Regulus, so that could straight up negate it. And so it's kind of made me realize that a card like Slumber isn't actually that good in this deck. You'd rather have a high impact breaker like a Sphere Motor Lava Golem instead. If I had that instead of the Kaiju Slumber, I definitely win that game for sure. But lesson learned. So at this point, we're 1-1. Not the greatest start, but honestly, at this point, like I said, I didn't have that many expectations going in. Next round, I played against a kind of weird build of Doomsday where they were playing like Eldritch cards. I don't remember too much about this matchup, but I don't think they did anything like super threatening with the cards. I definitely felt like the ceiling of that deck was a lot lower. So even though we won the dice roll, I don't really think it would have mattered if I had won or lost the die roll in this matchup. Round 4, I played against Drytron and I lost the die roll once again. Their end board basically both games was just like the Spell Trap Negate and the Xyz monster. They had a big ritual monster that was basically a double monster negate, and then they also gave themselves like a bit of non-engine like Forbidden Chalice, and the field spell as well could be an interaction in some matchups to like lower levels. But honestly, I feel like against boards like this, the Draco deck just really gets to shine, because if I resolve a single fusion spell, I'm able to always chain block my good effects like Pan and Urgla, and make it so, yes, they can negate the last thing on the chain, so like a random Dracotail name, but my most important cards like Malulu, Pan, Urgla are going to be resolving, and I'm going to be outing the board. So I think this match showed that like at the advanced format, you can choose to play more of a board breaker approach with just engine alone, and that can be enough in some matchups. This was also one of the only matchups where I ever slotted in a card like Cycle Reader, and it was decent against the deck, but they still ended up playing through it anyways. So I feel like in the future, like I mentioned in the deck profile, I probably wouldn't choose to play these low impact hand traps. Next round, I played against Exo-Sister. I lost a die roll in this one, but truthfully, I don't think it really mattered, because game 1, he had both full Exo combo and Shifter, so even if I went first, I definitely was still losing that game. And then game 2, I just didn't see any Dracotail cards, and my board wasn't good enough to stop his Exo-Sister monsters, especially paired with the Shifter he drew for turn, making it so my next turn play was a lot worse. In round 6, I played against a Ritual Beast deck, and again, this sort of fell in the same category as like the Drytron deck, even though I lost a die roll in this matchup again. Game 1, my opponent kind of bricked, so that wasn't really much of a game. And then game 2, they did set up their board, which was like Ritual Beast Steeds, plus basically 2 negates from their ulti Gaia Pelio. But I was able to play through it fairly easily with my hand, and was ultimately able to take that game down. Pretty lucky that he didn't draw Shifter in game 2, so we do win that one. And the last round of the day, I played against Sacred Beast, where I lost the die roll once again. So at this point in day 1, I'm 1-6 in die rolls. Game 1, he does set up like most of his full end board, but we are able to play through it because he does slightly misplay, and he leaves his F0 in attack mode, meaning once I cleared the other Xyz monsters from the field, it's 0 attack, and so I just attacked over it a bunch of times, even though he had other monsters on the field, and so we were able to win that game 1, even though he got to go first. Game 2, he got to go first again, and my hand was honestly incredible. I finally drew 5 mana as an actual hand trap with like a good card like Dracotail Pan Diffuse off as well, but I ultimately still ended up losing this game because the last card he had face down was a non-fusion area, and I just wasn't able to play through it because I didn't see an out to it. Or when I tried to make a card like Black Rose, he actually had an out to the Black Rose as well, and so we do end up losing that game. But ultimately, game 3, where I'm able to go first, set up my board, and just lock up the win from there. So after day 1, I'm 5-2. I honestly feel like, given how I lost 6 out of the 7 die rolls during that day, it was a pretty good result. I'm not going to deny I did get lucky, of course. A couple of my opponents did brick, and they weren't able to play the game, and so that maybe led to me winning a few matches that I shouldn't have. But going into day 2, I truly think this might have been one of my luckiest days of tournament play, like almost ever. Starting off the day in round H, I won the die roll against the Fairy Tale Invoked, which I think was probably the most important die roll win of the tournament, because that deck is super consistent, and going second is incredibly difficult to break their board because it's so layered with like cards like Invocation Sword and Snow in the graveyard as well. I think this matchup was pretty straightforward. I go first, I won the game. He went first, he won the game. And then game 3, I went first again. He just wasn't able to push through it. So I don't really remember too many interesting aspects about this matchup. This was also another matchup I sided in Cycle Reader, but ultimately it wasn't really good enough to stop my opponent. So in the future, like I said, I don't think I'd play this card. And in round 9, I get paired up against Magnet Warrior, and I think this is where my luck streak kind of gets going. So game 1, they kind of just brick, and I only have one play as well, which gets slopped. So we kind of get into this like back and forth grind game, but I'm ultimately able to pull out ahead because I am able to draw a play first. So we move on to game 2. In game 2, his hand just lost to a single copy of Skullmeister, and so I was able to win that one pretty cleanly. Again, I think I got pretty lucky. My opponent just didn't really get to play both games, because I think that Magnet Warrior deck can be pretty scary when it gets to go first too. And in round 10, I played against my first Blitzkrieg of the tournament, but again, I got super lucky here because my opponent just ended up breaking both games, and they just weren't able to play the game at all. Interestingly, this opponent also did end up top 8 as well, so I think it would have been a pretty tough matchup had he been able to play the game. But again, I got pretty lucky that they weren't able to play, and at this point, I felt my deck had been super consistent, and I hadn't seen any hands where I just had no plays at all. Round 11, I play against Toy White Forest deck, and I lost the die roll in this matchup as well. So I'm 2-9 in die rolls in just the Swiss rounds alone, which is honestly pretty unlucky. But I also think it's kind of balanced out with the fact that I did get pretty lucky in this game as well. So game 1, once again, my opponent bricks, and they aren't able to play the game. I'm just able to do my normal Dracotail stuff, play through like a couple 900 and just win the game from there. Game 2, he does get to go first, and he sets up a pretty layered end board. I'm not able to crack it. And then game 3, I think, is pretty straightforward. I get to go first, set up my full end board. He doesn't draw any like big breakers like evenly, and so I'm able to close out the game with a card like Secretariat Dragon. So at this point, we are 9-2 after Swiss, so we are guaranteed to make top 8, and I ended up 4th place after Swiss. And my top 8 match was actually a fin feature match, so I'll be hopping over there to sort of go over my thought process and go over the match in a little bit more detail. Alright, so in top 8, I actually ended up playing the same White Forest Toy player that I played in the last round of Swiss, because they ended up 5th. And honestly, going into this matchup, I was pretty worried. I obviously knew I got lucky in the Swiss match where they bricked game 1 even though they won a die roll. So I knew that winning the die roll was super important in this matchup. And luckily enough, I was finally able to win another die roll, and I was able to go first. In the feature match, like, you're going to be able to see my opponent's hand because the person writing the article was sitting on their side of the table, and they were writing down what they had in hand. So I'll be giving some context into what I remember having at the time. You'll see that my opponent was main decking evenly matched. To add a little bit more context, I knew that he was playing evenly matched because I did play him in Swiss, and he showed me afterwards that like, he was like, if I had drawn this card, I maybe would have had a chance. So I knew he played evenly in this deck, but I didn't know if it was main decked or not. So going into this matchup, I knew evenly was a card, but I didn't know whether or not I needed to play around in game 1. When I was playing this game, I wasn't even thinking about the card at all in game 1. Although even if I was, I don't really think I would have played too differently. But anyways, I think my starting hand for this game was like Kitu, Rahu, definitely had Predaplant Lizard because I remember drawing it and it was a brick. And I think one of the other cards was like a Dracotail Gogolet, the first time I've seen that card in Swiss. So I do some pretty standard Dracotail plays here. I don't really think you have to fear too much in this format other than cards like DD Crow and Skullmeister. So I did try to make sure that my play was kind of safe to both of them. Like, for example, I would chain block my Dracotail effects in the graveyard with a card like Arthalion, because I knew this player was probably unlikely to have enough points to play a card like Ghost Bell. I can make my Arthalion the last thing on the chain, and so their Skullmeister wouldn't really do anything. Like I said, I knew he was playing White Forest Toy at this point, and I think this is the first big decision point that I had. I had one extra fusion monster to make on top of Arthalion, and I decided to go for Secretariat. My logic was I had a good way to protect it from a card like Chalice because I did a flame set, and so I kind of figured, okay, my Secretariat should be pretty safe to end on. And also, I felt like it was kind of necessary because my hand only had like 5 mana as additional disruption without any of the good Dracotail names in hand. So I didn't have any Urgla, Pan, or Malulu, or any of the Dracotals that gave me bonus effects when they refused off. So I think the best thing I could have done with that 5 mana was basically just go into a fusion monster and give me follow-up. And so I kind of figured, okay, I probably want as good of a board as possible because one, I don't think he's not necessarily going to have those breakers in his main deck all the time, and two, my Phantom might not have been good enough had I just summoned the Gulabel instead. I think something important to note as well with 5 mana is that I don't recall having another Dracotail name in hand. I think because I had to start with Kitu and Rahu and none of the Dracotail monsters, I actually ended with just 5 mana and Lizard in hand with like maybe a fusion spell like Poly. So I actually don't think my 5 mana was actually that strong, and I think perhaps I could have chosen to play a little bit differently. Given that, like, maybe I should have tried to set up a better 5 mana with my turn 1 play, where like I would try to add back like an extra good Dracotail monster instead of like going for like one of the traps or something like that. So I think this was maybe my second misplay earlier on. I was really banking on drawing like one of the good Dracotail names off of one of the 3 trap draws, but I don't really think that's necessarily the best way to do it, because of course you're not guaranteed to do so. During my turn, I could have either not summoned Secretariat Dragon, or I could have just gone for a play that gave me more Dracotail monsters in hand to make my Femina a little bit of a better interaction. You actually see that my opponent's hand wasn't actually that good. He had 2 Sylvies, so 2 normal summons, and then 2 copies of Evenly, and 1 copy of Chalice. So he actually only had 1 starter. And it's funny because looking back, like at this point, I end up not keeping the Forbidden Chalice, and it would just been like, okay, if I had kept the Chalice, I would have won the game. But obviously, like, I don't know that at the time. I think the best play was to keep the Secretary on. So before we get to that point, when he moves into battle phase, since I know he's playing evenly, I decide, okay, I'm gonna give him credit for actually having it, and I'm gonna choose to play as if he actually does. So at the start of battle phase, I decide to use Horn on my Arthalion to put it back into the extra deck, to not only put Horn into the graveyard, but also makes it so if I draw a Dracotail name later, I have a really good monster to go into that can give myself more resources back, or I can actually use it to interact with him and bounce his monsters back to hand. The next thing I did, though, I don't really know if I agree with. I don't know why I didn't just like hard commit to the read of like, okay, he has evenly. I just let him go to the end of battle phase, and I do end up using like Chalice on my Secretarion that use a Flame to negate it and draw a card. So I definitely should have done this before the end of the battle phase, just so I can get my Flame into the graveyard. And it's really important because I know he's not killing me this turn, and so we are going to play a grind game. Having that second trap in the deck is super important, I think, in my opinion. If I had been able to put back Horn, I would have had an additional trap in the deck to set, giving me an extra Dracotail effect later on in the future turns, but also making it so on the crackback, if I don't kill him, I can actually set 2 traps instead of just 1. And this is ultimately going to come to bite me later on. After resolving evenly, like, I decided to keep Secretariat. I feel like Secretariat just has more value than a card like the other card I had, which was Dracotail Sting. So I do let 2 of my traps get banished face down, which again I think maybe was a mistake, especially because we are choosing to play this grind game. But at the time I figured, okay, maybe Secretariat is good enough to win the game, because honestly at this point I had actually drawn 2 cards and both of them were spell cards, and so my hand was like 2 spell cards, 5 mana, and the Lizard. So I actually couldn't summon anything with the 5 mana. So again, this is where the mistake of not searching like an extra Dracotail monster to guarantee 5 mana was live does also come back to bite me. This basically just means he can play his entire turn out. And I think what he ended on was like the Diabellstar Vengeance. He has Snake Eyes Vengeance Dragon, and then he also drew a couple of cards with like, and so he had like card like Forbidden Chalice set. So it gets back to me. I did top deck an Urgla, which is honestly really good, and that's made it so my anytime I fuse now, I have 2 Dracotail effects, or if I had to use 5 mana, I'd have at least 1 Dracotail effect to go off of. So Urgla was definitely a great top deck. It basically made it so I had 2 Dracotail effects now, and I think that's what I needed to get back into this game. You'll see here that he does use his Chalice on my Guillemot. I think he slightly misplaced. He kind of forgot that Snake Eyes Vengeance can only use his effect during the main phase, and so my Urgla is able to go battle phase and just swing over Diabell. I think that's great because not only because if I had let Diabell stay on the field, he could have summoned a card like Zapper Shrimp to pop one of my back row, and then synchro into Satellite Warrior and popped even more by back row or my monsters. And I don't think I would have had a chance to come back at that point. He is able to pop my Kitu, but I am able to use that Urgla Engrave to get back my Lucius. And then from there, I'm able to basically get a couple more resources back. And my goals at this point is just to clear his board of as many monsters as possible. And I think I'm able to do that fairly well. Like, Pan is able to pop a monster on the field. Arthalion is able to grab back 5 mana and Pan back to my hand. And I am able to set Horn off of the Pan. I remember at this point, like, I didn't get to use the Lucius effect to set because I was missing that extra spell and trap in the deck, which should have been the copy of Dracotail Flame had I just fully committed to the play earlier on before letting him get to the end of battle phase. So that mistake really comes back to bite me. I think my end board was like Chalice, Arthalion, and like a Horn, and I had like 5 mana and Pan in hand. So obviously my only interactions are going to be Horn and 5 mana Pan against whatever follow-up that he has. So at this point, I just don't really have enough gas to stop my opponent from really re-establishing his board. And a card like Diabellstar Vengeance is honestly just so good in one of these formats where it can pop a card during both players' turns and it gets him an extra resource from the extra deck. And so just even though I was able to stop him from killing me, on the next turn, I just wasn't able to do anything. Like, you'll see here, like, I basically only had 1 single play, which was the Kitu that I set earlier. I think I drew like another spell for turn. And so at this point, I had like 5 mana and like maybe 1 other monster, meaning I couldn't actually fuse it into anything. Looking back, I definitely do regret the way I played this game. There's so many different things I could have done differently, I think, but it is what it is. I don't think Game 2 is that interesting to go over. I basically have my full pure Dracotail combo again backed up with Cosplay Cyclone, and my opponent just has no way to stop that. He didn't have an evenly this time, and so when he tries to just play into the board, I'm able to use my interaction 1 by 1. So again, nothing too interesting in this game. I was just able to full stop him, and he wasn't able to play the game. Now, Game 3, I think, is a little bit unfortunate. I did draw Dracotail 5 mana, I did draw Dracotail 5 mana in my opening hand, so I could have used it as a hand trap had I actually drawn a Dracotail name to use with it. I think the two other monsters I drew were like a Skullmeister and a King of the Swamp, so the best thing I could do was fuse away both of them to make a Millenniumizer strict. But ultimately, I just felt like that was definitely just a losing play because I'm committing 3 cards into a monster that doesn't really do anything, and also it made me lose my only Dracotail name in hand. So at this point, I only have a Skullmeister to stop his turn, and there wasn't really a good point for me to use that Skullmeister. I was going to save it for the Diabell trap that was trying to add Diabell's Vengeance, because I feel like that card's honestly one of the best cards in the deck. But unfortunately, he did actually just hard draw the spell that he needed to get access to it, and so Skullmeister ended up being dead in my hand. So basically, I just didn't have anything to do during my first turn, and my opponent is able to basically set up their full combo with like Vanadium Reframing as an Omni-Negate on their end board. In addition to reframing, he also had a bunch of other back row as well. He had the quick play fusion spell. He also had the trap that was able to let him summon a white force and then synchro from there. There was definitely so much I had to play through on this end board, and given the hand I started with only had one Dracotail name, I think it was definitely going to be an uphill battle the whole way. Now for turn, I did draw the Kaiju, and at this point I was thinking, oh my gosh, if this was just a sphere mode, I think this game would be over because I had like multiple ways to play. And again, this is where my deck building choice of playing the Kaijus over something like sphere mode really comes back to bite me. Because I think just trading 1-for-1 into a board like that is nowhere near good enough. I ultimately chose the Tribute over Diabell because I felt like this was probably the scariest card. He could use it to summon out any of the Tuner Synchros, so it gave him a lot of flexibility, and I figured it would just be the hardest card to interact with. My game plan was kind of just to play with the Predaplants first and not really use my Dracotails until later on, because my Predaplant engine is ultimately able to go into a card like Black Rose, and I figured, okay, maybe there's a chance he lets me get there. So I start off with Predator Primitive, and I'm trying to do my Predaplant plays from here, but at this point he does remove my Longfellia before I'm able to summon out Little Lizard to the board. I need to pivot to my plan B where, okay, I lost my Tuner, so now my plan B is to summon Starving Venom and basically try to do the same thing to his board. So at this point I used the Longfella in the graveyard to put a Predator counter on Poplar specifically. The reason I chose Poplar is because I figured, okay, it is a level 4. I didn't want him to make like a level 12 Synchro monster, but I didn't really think about like the fact that he could play level 8s as well. And so you'll see here that he does use the Poplar and Humongous to make Draco Berserker of the Tenny for an extra interaction. And truthfully, this is not something I considered at all. I just assumed that the Poplar was going to be dead. So looking back, maybe there's a world I put it on something else, although I truly don't think it would have made that big of a difference. No matter what he was summoning off of Poplar, I think he always had at least one target he could go into with the Poplar, and it would have interacted with me in one way or another. I was trying to go for that Starving Venom, like just trying to get the body onto the board and then summon out Starving Venom to like then crash into something, but he didn't let me get 2 darks on the board, and he used Draco Berserker to get rid of the Lizard. So at this point, I lost access to both of my board clearing potential cards, so I'm kind of forced to start playing with the one copy of Feminine in my hand. But honestly, it's just not going to be enough, because with just a single Dracotail name, I'm only able to set one Dracotail spell from the deck, and he is able to use that fusion spell to summon this Asmina guy, which is just able to send the Kichu to the grave. At this point, I knew the game was pretty much over. I had no way to kill him. I had no more access to Dracotail names. I had no way to fuse into anything meaningful. And so I am going to choose to play it out, because there's no point in scooping, in my opinion. And I do my best, like where I try to clear most of his board, and with like one copy of Dracostapelia as an interaction. But obviously, that's just never going to be enough against his follow-up. And so I do end up losing this game. Looking back at this game now, there were so many different things I could have done differently, and especially in game 1, where there were a couple of spots where I felt like had I just played slightly differently, I could have been able to win game 1, and then who knows what would happen from there. But you live and you learn. I hope this part was like insightful and interesting to you, whether or not you were a Genesys player. You also got to see a little bit more of like actual Genesys gameplay. I think there were chances for both players to win like all 3 of those games, and that's kind of different from an advanced where you're comparing hands most of the time. So I felt like game 3, I didn't really have much I could have done, since I only drew one Dracotail name. And of course, like I already kind of like lost the game beforehand because I chose to play a Kaiju over Sphere mode. In game 1, I probably should have played a lot better and given myself the best chance to win the match by taking down game 1. Alright, so that's going to do it for the tournament report. And for the final part of the video, I'll just be quickly going over some of my thoughts on the Genesys format, going over some of like the pros and cons so you can see whether or not you want to try it out for yourself. So overall in the format, I think I had a pretty fun time actually playing. Over the course of my 11 rounds, I played against 11 different decks, if you're not counting like the 2 Doomsday variants as the same deck. And I think that's something that's pretty interesting about Genesys. You're pretty much able to play almost anything. So obviously, upside is you're able to play your favorite decks. You're able to really concoct something that no one is really expecting. That's definitely one benefit I had going to this event with this deck, because this deck was really on no one's radar. It basically made it so I had an edge in every matchup already because my opponents weren't really sure what I was doing or what my deck was capable of. That's one good thing about Genesys. If you're good at finding like good tech cards, or if you're good at finding like underappreciated archetypes, then I definitely think that this format could be good for you. I also did feel like I said, in almost every game that I played, even though I lost all those die rolls and it was an uphill battle like every time, I felt like my engine was good enough to play through boards most of the time. And of course, that's not going to be the case for every single engine in the game, but I do feel like in this format, even like the quote-unquote combo deck boards are pretty breakable, at least when compared to like the advanced format. Now, however, on the other hand, I do think that there are some downsides, notable problems that I did notice with Genesys. Of course, since it is Yu-Gi-Oh, there's still going to be games where you're basically just comparing hands, especially if a combo deck is involved. Like, yeah, there are going to be games where you're just not going to see any non-engine, things like that, but that's part of regular Yu-Gi-Oh. My biggest problem is probably the fact that like cards like Dimension Shifter are still very cheap. Only 2 of the decks I played against were able to play this card, but I feel like just having certain cards like this in the format that still just have no counterplay and are still incredibly frustrating to play against, it just makes it so some games can be a bad experience, some games can really feel out of your hand. Like when I played against the EXO player, I didn't really feel like I had much control in that matchup. Like even my hands were good, I was still losing to the copy of Shifter. And so I think that in the future, if these specific problem cards like this could be addressed, it would make the format a lot better. Of course, on the bright side, since this is a Genesys format and not like the advanced format, we got adjustments much more often. And so problem cards like this are going to be able to be taken care of relatively quickly if they do become too problematic. So overall, those were just some quick thoughts I had about playing the format. This format's not perfect, of course, but I do think it's a nice change from the advanced format, and I would recommend like any advanced player, if you never played Genesys, is just try it out. I'm pretty sure every single person in the top cut was just an advanced player who like decided, oh, on a whim, like, oh, I'm already here on the Friday, let's just play Genesys. So I would definitely recommend giving it a shot if you haven't tried it already. It can definitely be a pretty interesting time, and I think this format's just going to continually improve as they start making these adjustments to the points list. So that's going to do it for this big tournament recap video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and found it interesting. If you have any questions about Genesys format or like the tournament as a whole, I'd be happy to answer them. Also, let me know if you're interested in seeing more Genesys content. I know this is pretty much like the first Genesys video I've basically ever posted, but if you're interested in seeing more content like this, I would be happy to upload one of the Genesys type video every once in a while. Before I end off the video, I also want to ask you guys to quickly check if you're subbed to the channel. It doesn't mean anything to you, but it makes a world of difference to me as I'm trying to hit 15k subs by the end of this year. It really means a lot to me. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.